Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. The government has planned to introduce 16 new bills in the upcoming winter session of Parliament, spread over 23 days from 7th December to 29th of December. The winter session will have 17 sittings. The session will take place in the existing Parliament building as construction of the new one has been impacted by a number of factors like the pandemic first and then the Russia-Ukraine war affecting overseas deliveries. So the government says it looks forward to constructive debates and discussions during the winter session. But the question is, how will the government ensure smooth proceedings in both houses? What strategies will the opposition adopt and what are some of the significant legislations that the government is planning to get passed during the winter session? All this and much more in perspective today with three distinguished panelists joining us on the program. Let me begin by introducing them to you. With me in the studio is senior journalist Mr. K.V. Prasad and Mr. Chakshu Roy, Head of Outreach PRS. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the program. And also pleased to welcome, joining us virtually, is Aditi Fadnis, political editor at the Business Standard. Thank you, Aditi ji, for joining us on the program as well. Mr. Prasad, let me begin the program today with you. The first word from you on how significant do you think the upcoming winter session of Parliament is going to be? We'll talk about the legislative agenda later on, but in terms of the unique characteristics, the fact that Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar is going to, it's going to be his first session as presiding officer. Also the fact that for the Congress party, it's a new chapter, it has a new president. So going into the winter session, what are the special things that you expect?
Well, I think every session of Parliament has its own unique characteristics, but in this case, more so, as you already highlighted two of the points. The fact remains, Mr. Dhankar became the president just around the time when the last session ended. And so it will be his first legislative session where he'll be presiding over as the chairman of Rajya Sabha. So obviously, there'll be a new style and new things that one would look forward to, while continuing with what's on the agenda on the list of business that governments would like to bring to the House. It's equally interesting the fact that Mr. Kharge is now the Congress president. As far as we know as of now, that's on Friday, he remains to be the leader of the opposition in the Rajya Sabha. So now if you go by the standards that the Congress wants to set for itself, he has to at some point of time relinquish the office because by its own declaration at Udaipur, one man, one post, or one person, one post was what was clearly demarcated. So, but I don't know, indications are that he may have to continue for a while for the reasons is best known to the party. Also the fact that some of them who are possible contenders are out in the Bharat Jodo Yatra. So, well, these are things that will play out as we go into the session. Legislative agenda remains, and of course, winter session is especially important after the monsoon because these are the two prime sessions of Indian Parliament where a lot of legislative agenda gets done. Right. And a variety of bills are taken up by either houses. One, because the budget session is devoted to budget and passage of everything that related to financial. So the substantial legislative agenda of the government gets done in these two sessions. So that's why it becomes important. And
after huge disruptions in the monsoon session, one would expect that the winter session will at least be more productive. Aditi ji, coming to you, the fact that, it's unique in many ways. The government has laid out its agenda, 16 bills on the table, which it expects to get passed. But what about the opposition parties? What do you think its strategy is going to be? For the Congress party, as we've discussed, it's going to be a new chapter, but several of its key leaders are going to skip the session. If we talk about the other parties in the opposition rank, what are some of the significant issues that you think that they are going to rake up in the coming few weeks?
Well, we know that Rahul Gandhi is not going to join the winter session. He's already made that announcement. He's too busy with the Bharat Jodo Yatra. So he will not be there in the Lok Sabha. And the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha strategies will have to be decided under the overall direction of the Congress President, Mallikarjun Kharge, and the leader of the parliamentary party, which is Sonia Gandhi. So that is one thing out of the way. I think you're going to see a certain amount of disruption on fiscal federalism. Many state governments are very upset about the way GST proceeds are being shared with them, and they have already flagged issues of federalism and the fact that compensation, the full compensation, has not been paid to them, and so on and so forth. There are many other areas about federalism which will be raised, I think, in this session. And also, the session will be held I think, just after the results of the Gujarat and the Himachal Pradesh Assembly come in. So that will be another bit of excitement that will add to proceedings.
Certainly, I think it begins on the day the MCD results will be announced, and a day after the results of Himachal and Gujarat Assembly elections will be announced. Mr. Roy, if I could come to you and understand more about the legislative agenda. 16 bills on the table, too short a time to discuss each of those bills, and also because a lot of details are still not available. In terms of productivity, declining productivity, year after year, session after session, has been a matter of huge concern. Can that change? Can we expect, smooth proceedings and better productivity this time around?
Tina, it's interesting that you bring that up, because as both Prasad sir and Aditi ma'am was mentioning that there is an element of disruption that has happened in the monsoon session. So if we recall, monsoon session, both houses remained disrupted for roughly half the time that they were supposed to function. Rajya Sabha saw suspension of, I think, 23 members for the entire duration of the session. Lok Sabha, 4 members were suspended, but their suspension was cut short, so they could participate in the session. So the winter session begins in that backdrop. And one of the things, and Prasad sir was mentioning this, that and you were mentioning it, that for the Vice President, Shri Dhankar, this will be the first session. And one of the things that the Vice President, what I've been reading is, what he's been doing is, for the last 3 months, he's been meeting the floor leaders of all parties in the Rajya Sabha and also individual MPs in groups. He's been meeting them. And some of the media reporting around those engagements is that one part of the conversation is how do you ensure smooth functioning of the House. So that's going to be an interesting thing, as to, we have seen former Vice President Shri Venkaiah Naidu, he had a certain way of functioning in the House, and now we'll see a new chapter in Rajya Sabha begin. I think the other part that we should also think about in terms of the functioning of Rajya Sabha, at least, is that this is the year that there has been a turnaround in the Rajya Sabha numbers. So by the monsoon session, we saw a change in the numbers. New members have come in. I think the treasury benches are now far exceed the principal opposition party just in terms of numbers. So possibly that will play out in some way. In terms of the legislative business, and we can go into the details, but my opening kind of observation about the legislative business would be that there are a number of key bills which are currently pending before committees. So, for example, the Electricity Amendment Bill is pending before a parliamentary committee. The Competition Amendment Bill is pending before a committee. So, as long as the reports don't come out, these bills cannot proceed, in our legislative functioning. But there are a number of other bills for which committee reports have been tabled. So the way I would look at the legislative business is, possibly the government's priority will be to get those bills discussed in the House which have been passed by one House. So there are a number of bills which have been passed by Lok Sabha and they are pending in Rajya Sabha. So possibly those will get done first. And then we can come to the bills either which are completely new or which are pending in both Houses.
Certainly. So we'll come back to that in just a bit. But Mr. Prasad, coming back to you, one point that Mr. Roy mentioned is the turnaround in Rajya Sabha numbers. And since we're talking about what makes this particular session unique and, the unique characteristics, one of the important aspects in terms of numbers is also that since the time Nitish Kumar has, parted ways with the NDA and joined the Mahagathbandhan once again, will it make any impact in numbers in the Rajya Sabha? The fact that the deputy chairman is also from the JDU, he was elected with the help of the NDA. Does that make any impact on the way the House is, functioning or the treasury benches?
Well, I think as far as I see it, the party of Nitish Kumar, the JDU, may take a stand depending on situation to situation. In the sense, when I say that, it could be issue-based rather than a generic umbrella kind of thing, we won't support you kind of thing. I mean, it could be just that, just a speculative theory from my side, I would say. You mentioned of the deputy chairman. Of course, he comes from the JDU party. But there has been a radio silence, if one were to say, in terms of the party did not tell him to do anything. While the party distanced itself from the lead coalition partner, it had not, at least not ostensibly or not officially, we haven't heard anything that it had. So we leave it, and then one expects the deputy chairman's office, when you're in the chair, you remain a member of the house, but you don't really have to exercise your party line or diktat.
Right.
So one kind gives that leverage to the office. Having said that, I think the turnaround which Mr. Roy was mentioning is also new members have come to the house. So it adds. In any case, the the coalition which is in the government has had a kind of a working majority in the Rajya Sabha for a while. So it has not really, it was not buffeted as it was earlier times when it didn't have the numbers. So as we see in many bills had got passed, which came from Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, in many cases the opposition kept on saying ki you refer it to the standing committee, or having cleared the Lok Sabha, referred to a select committee because that's the only provision left for them. That was one area, but that can end. But this time, the Congress may not be present in the same strength and numbers because of the ongoing party program. So some of its key leaders may still be away from the House. But that does not say that Mr. Kharge will be there. And now he's the party president, so it's much hands-on in terms of taking a decision.
Certainly, and the party is meeting on the 3rd of December to deliberate on.
And also to have this cross-party understanding, that's important. And Mr. Kharge has been able to do that for a while. We could see in the last few sessions, he's been able to bring around the other parties in the opposition under one's common space. So we'll see as we go along.
Right. So what kind of understanding is he able to, build just ahead of the session is something that we'll all have to wait and watch. But Aditi ji, coming back to you to understand now the strategy of the regional parties. It's an interesting timing that the 7th of December, the MCD results will be declared. If going by the confidence of, Arvind Kejriwal, the Aam Aadmi Party, do you think if they have a better performing, it could raise their decibels in the upper house at least, where they have a fair representation? And also, if I could ask you about the role of the TRS, we've seen them being quite vocal and, on issues cornering the government. Do you also see a bigger role of the TRS now inside the House when the session convenes?
I'm almost certain that TRS will be more active, more vocal, and may even match the Trinamool Congress voice for voice when it comes to raising issues of their interest and also disrupting. But we have to see what Prasad said was very germane. We have to see how the situation on the floor of the House now works out, because traditionally the Vice President or the Chairman of the House conducts proceedings during the question hour and the 0 hour, and after that the Deputy Chairman takes over. Now, the Deputy Chairman is the current Deputy Chairman is an extremely conscientious and a very honest sort of MP. And I'm pretty sure that he takes his duties as a neutral observer while he's in the chair very, very seriously. Sometimes it's not so easy to be neutral in the upper house as we will be, I think, fairly predictable fireworks. And as the opposition is will not be present in full strength, Rahul Gandhi won't be there. The proceedings will be, I think, somewhat more interesting in the upper house.
Okay, so this was about the expectations largely on, the winter session and how things could work. Coming back, Mr. Roy, to the legislative agenda, and one of the much talked about bills has been the personal data protection bill, which had to be, rolled back, and a revised version was then brought in by the government sometime last month. So even though it is open for public consultation till the 18th of this month, correct me if I'm wrong, could it also be brought in and incorporated within the government's legislative agenda once the consultation period is over?
Tina, I look at the personal data protection bill as one of those pieces of legislation where Parliament was able to scrutinize a piece of legislation the way a legislation should be looked at by the Parliament of a mature democracy. The bill was introduced, it was sent to a select committee, a joint parliamentary committee. MPs from all political parties were represented on it. The committee gave a detailed report, made a number of recommendations, and the government, based on those recommendations, thought that it was fit and proper to, take back the bill that was introduced and work on a new draft. And they took some time to work on that new draft and have put it in the public domain. Now, my understanding of the way it will work is that public comments will come in by a certain date. I think you mentioned the 18th. Those comments will be looked at by the ministry. Then the ministry will initiate the process for getting that particular piece of legislation approved through cabinet. Now, if between the 18th to the 29th, till the time when the House is supposed to function, if that process is completed, then possibly we might see that the bill, might come in the winter session. Incidentally, it had come into the winter session when this Lok Sabha had started. So we'll have to wait and watch for that. But looking at the timelines, it might also be possible that the ministry might want to take its time, go through the comments, look at what different stakeholders and interministerial consultations say, and then bring it in the winter session when there's a longer period for it to deliberate and go through it.
Right.
Incidentally, this is also going to be a session wherein the government will be bringing a certain amount of supplementary budget that it would need Parliament's approval of. 2 or 3 things that our viewers should look out for in terms of legislative business, especially in this session. So one of the bills that will impact all of us is a bill called the mediation bill. And this bill has been looked at by a parliamentary committee. And what this bill does is that before anybody can go to court to contest a case, what this bill says is the parties, who are opposing each other should go for a mandatory mediation process so that they can work out their differences without, going to court and going through a lengthy litigation process. So I think that's one particular piece of legislation that all of us should be looking at. There are a couple of legislation which are related to the environment. So there is a bill on energy conservation, which was introduced in the last session. It has been passed by one house. It is going to be listed in Rajya Sabha. And the reason this bill becomes important is in light of the different climate negotiations that are happening. This bill talks about carbon trading and a couple of different other environmental measures in a legislative fashion. The last thing, the last piece of legislation that I would like to highlight before our viewers would be the piracy bill. This bill was introduced at the beginning of this Lok Sabha, again 2019 winter session. And what it proposes to do is to strengthen the penal provisions related to combating piracy in Indian waters. So far, no piece of legislation covers how do we prosecute pirates who either operate in Indian waters or how do you deter them.
Right.
And this piece of legislation was referred to the Committee on External Affairs. It gave its report. So possibly that's another piece of legislation that might come up during the session.
Okay, very quickly, Mr. Prasad, one thing that I would also like to touch upon is the kind of challenges that parliamentary proceedings, parliamentary functioning have seen over the last couple of years. Lack of consensus, of course, is the prime factor. The issue also is the persistent deadlock, which impacts productivity because repeated adjournments in houses. Now, as we look, in different aspects, new chapter from the Congress's side, there are regional parties which, of course, will have a wider and fair representation, especially in the upper house, and now with a new presiding officer. Where do you see all of this collaborating and working for the efficacy of the parliament in terms of, number one, the way House is run, and in terms of how larger consensus is also reached upon? Yeah. So how do these parties actually need to change the way their approach is towards smooth proceedings, smooth functioning of the House?
Before I just come to your question, I'll just add to two bills that Mr. Roy mentioned, I think two important, equally important, which he may agree, is the multi-state cooperative bill which the government plans to introduce. And of course, the second, where the select committee report, joint committee report is already on the biodiversity. So these are two other pieces of legislation which will have an impact both in terms of, one in terms of environment and one in terms of the way the center-state relationship, because this multi-state cooperative is something, this is a new idea the government has, and we have a cooperation minister in the Union Home Minister himself has a portfolio. So it's a very key reform oriented step by this government. So
could it also be contentious?
It will be contentious simply because it's already when they talked about this day, there were murmurs of protest. So I'm sure it's going to be looked at differently when it comes to the floor. That's my hunch. Now coming to your question, I always believe Parliament is a place where politics and policy come through a process. So they have to play out. There's no way, no other way in there. And when you talk of consensus, you see, consensus has been the key hallmark of parliamentary work. From time immemorial, look at it, opposition has had its issues. They keep flagging it. And eventually, it's always said the opposition can have its say, the government will have its way. That's the parliamentary adult. But having said that, it depends a lot on how the parliament and different managers, parliamentary managers of different parties, put their heads together and sort out it. And this is where every political party, when it's running the government, the onus comes, because many a time people in the opposition keep raising issues. So everybody sits down collectively, now that we have so many parties working together, try and see what is a common meeting ground and what best can be done to accommodate different competing positions. And there always has been a way has been found out. So it's a process of accommodation that needs to be looked at. So different political parties at different points of time, within the parties itself, they have some issues. They need to be sorted out, because in a democracy, you have this debate and discussion, and only then you move forward.
Right. Aditi ji, one last word from you on how do we, of course, look at building larger consensus. It's taking forward from the point that Mr. Prasad made. And also the fact that each time, I ask this question to all panelists before every session, the fact that, it's slowly shifted to the approach of my way or highway. So the session begins at all party meetings, every party agrees to, work in unison. But as soon as the session begins, from day one, it's stalemate and repeated adjournments. Very difficult for the common man to actually understand how the parliament has been functioning and working for their benefit, where the larger public good takes center stage. That idea, that trust somewhere is, lacking now. All of us collectively, and more importantly, the parliamentarians, all political parties have to ensure that that is brought back.
Well, there is trust and there isn't trust. There is trust to the extent that everything that is done in Parliament is a reflection of what people think and what people say outside. So I don't think there's any deviation in that. But I think you will find that as general elections come nearer, moods get more fraught, Parliament, the proceedings get more edgy, and it's harder to strike a consensus. So now we are, about a year away from general elections, a bit more than a year. And so, yes, there is going to be fighting, there's going to be disruption, there's going to be division of opinion. But at the end of the day, I think we should all be very proud that our democracy cannot be taken over by anybody else, by any other force. It cannot be taken over by the armed forces, unlike we've seen in our neighborhood. It cannot be taken over by groups of people who are bent upon establishing their supremacy, again, as we have seen in our neighborhood. And Parliament, at the end of the day, does actually achieve quite a lot.
That's right.
So
and
if there is,
I think we need to just keep reasserting the fact that our democracy is for the people, by the people, and of the people. The people are at the center stage. So, okay, that having been said, time is running out. I'll have to wind up the program. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Perspective, sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. And viewers, thank you to you as well for your time. I'll see you same time tomorrow. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.